I think it's important to note trust with that, because if I've done a bunch of damage and then try and build trust, it's going to take so much work. But if you've already set the boundaries and worked on those together, trust can develop. And you need that, because if there starts being signs of a manic episode approaching or a depressive episode approaching, if that person can trust you enough to listen to what it looks like from the outside, you might have a better handle on things together.
So the last thing that I wanted to ask you is if you would talk about what would you say to somebody who has a loved one that is struggling with their mental health? What kinds of things can you recommend that you think would help them to know how to help their loved one, and also how to make sure they take care of themselves so that they don't end up struggling as well?
Sure. I would say focusing on the nurturing where it makes the most impact. So that might be separating the illness from the person to have that compassion. For me, it was also nurturing those grandkids. So they are an extension of her. So if I'm attending to their healthy development, I'm also helping their mother. Less criticism from me was a big aspect. Michelle, you helped me see this more clearly, because I was saying how the funny things I complain about in our day-to-day household life, and you're like, give her a break. That might be the only thing she can do all day, And so I've really made it a point to think before I talk on these things, and using some of the times to have a conversation with my husband instead. Don't go tell her what I'm all bugged about, but get it out still, right? So I'm doing a lot less criticism, and that actually is healthier on my mind. I'm still getting it out, but I'm not doing any damage myself. So early warning signs are super important for me. If I could touch on that for a minute. This onset, and I think it's quite typical for late 20s in females, maybe early 20s for males. If those studies are right, you think your wonderful child is like healthy by all aspects of the word, and then all of a sudden something like this hits you, it really blows you away. So early warning signs are important. I know a lot of our listeners already are in the mess, but if anyone out there can benefit from the fact that acting upon those early warning signs is actually going to have a better outcome for the person, the longer they're in manic episodes and euphoria and those kind of mental states, the harder it will be to ever get them back down to a stable state. But given that, the early warning signs were a really different change in sleeping and eating. So that becomes the most apparent probably. And then the big ideas, so some of them made sense, like, oh, I want to start a nonprofit to do this. And others didn't make sense at all. Like, I'm going to go have this meeting with this owner of this big tech company, and we're going to discuss strategy, So big ideas like that are a little bit shocking. Big time wasters, like putting in your earphones, going outside, maybe don't see you for 3 more hours. I don't know, just really interesting ways in how she was spending time. Talking about things that aren't real was the scariest part. So very unrealistic things like being able to communicate with spirits, or diving into things online that aren't true, right? Like not being able to discern what's real and what's not real. So those were the early signs. So I think the triggers for everyone can be different. Sometimes if the person's been through trauma, maybe they've been through an addiction. Adderall had a part to play in this. Using it properly and then actually increasing a dose where an increase in dose was not needed, had some part of this initial onset as well. So turning back to the person who's taking care of this person is, trying to work through those denial and acceptance stages a little bit sooner than later is so beneficial for you. As soon as I got done with those 4 treatment sessions, and I just haven't felt the need to go back, right? I will if I need to. But I said, oh, I could have used that 18 months ago. So if I was sharing that experience with somebody, it's like, that was how I ended it. I'm like, yeah, I could have used that a year ago. So don't put that off. Really care about your own health. It's interesting to think that I had a diet that I was following, healthy eating choices for myself in the midst of all this. And I held to it. I lost 30 pounds and kept it off. And it's been over a year and a half now that I've kept it off, and completely unrelated, but at the same time, really not. Now I don't have my own, I used to be pretty hard on myself about my weight, right? And I don't have that lingering in the mix of all this other stuff. I took care of it. I feel better. I'm healthier. I'm physically and emotionally. So
yeah. And that's, I think it all just comes back to the boundaries. I think boundaries is probably the most important part of this, is so that you're facilitating a healthy relationship, so that you actually are helping and not harming the other person intentionally. I think when we fall into that fear motivator, that we can unintentionally harm ourselves and the other person, and impede the progress towards healing rather than support it. So,
and trust. I think it's important to note trust with that, because if I've done a bunch of damage and then try and build trust, it's going to take so much work. But if you've already set the boundaries and worked on those together, trust can develop. And you need that, because if there starts being signs of a manic episode approaching, or a depressive episode approaching, if that person can trust you enough to listen to what it looks like from the outside, you might have a better handle on things together.